Hello, everybody. The Avs have snapped their winning streak with a loss 2-1 in the shootout to the Montreal Canadiens here at home. A little bit of a disappointing one because it was a close game from the start. Pretty low event. Avs had a stronger first period, but then their game grew kind of quiet. Obviously, they get a point because it comes outside of regulation, but left with a little bit of a bitter taste and definitely a lot of disappointment in that locker room. But let's get to some of these questions tonight. There were still some interesting storylines inside this one. First question, what the heck is goaltender interference? It's a great question. Jared Bednar addressed it in his post-game that he felt that both players, Lehkonen and Colton, were pushed into the goaltender. The Colton one in particular, earlier in the game, felt egregious, and it even seemed like Colorado might be getting a penalty. A power play coming out of that one, and that Montreal's Lane Hudson might be getting called for pushing Colton into the goaltender. That was not the case. Both of these were called against Colorado, and on the heels of the Buffalo game where the whistle was not blown and there was no goaltender interference based upon Parker Kelly's limited contact with Benson, it does feel a little bit unfair. It has obviously been called pretty inconsistently in such a short amount of time. I don't necessarily mind them calling it. If they're going to call it consistently, they're going to err on the side of caution, I guess, but there's not much that a Colton or a Lehkonen could have done differently in those situations. I look at the Colton one, a pretty imminent scoring chance there, and it's just so different from how Benson and the contact with Wedgwood happened in the Buffalo game. Not only that, it leads to a pretty poor outcome for the Colorado Avalanche. Asked Mackenzie Blackwood in the postgame his perspective as a goaltender on goalie interference, and he said that he thought he knew what it was, but he doesn't think he knows anymore, and it's above his pay grade at this point. Definitely frustrating to see that lack of consistency, and it almost feels retaliatory because of Jared Bednar's outspoken troubles with it, but there's not much the team can do but move on from that. Mikko's making history with the Avs. Each year he's gotten better. Does he get the big contract? If so, why not sign now? The Mikko Rantanen contract, it's going to loom over our heads for a little bit now because he continues to play better and better. 13-game point streak, his 100th power play goal. They actually had an interesting power play. We'll get to that in a couple questions. But Mikko Rantanen with a power play goal tonight. It just continues to get better for him, and it's going to make the contract a little bit more difficult. I think the only holdup on the front office side of things is going to be clarity around injuries, the injury situation, and what it projects for the future, because they probably have a little bit more of an idea on how the cap is going to increase going into next year. I think that they're still very motivated to keep Rantanen a part of this core, and I look at Mackenzie Blackwood in that extension as something hopefully positive to move those negotiations in the right direction to keep Mikko Rantanen a part of this team moving forward. Did someone give the Avs sleepy time tea? It feels like the early Buffalo game and this game the Avs have been very sleepy and not making passes. I think my trouble with the way that they created offensively tonight is, again, not meaningful zone time offensively. I think that they passed a little bit too much and they weren't able to generate any scoring chances that would have posed a real threat. Also, a huge goaltending performance from Jakub Dabas in his second NHL game on Montreal's side of things, 23 years old. I have to give him a little bit of credit, but the Avs didn't challenge him nearly as much as they should have, especially with some of the weapons at the top. And so I share in the sentiment that it was a little bit of a sleepy game from them, especially outside of that first period. They turned the gas on in the 5 minutes in that, remaining of the third period. But beyond that, there's like 35 minutes of play that I can't really account for enough energy. I will shout out, though, that they played pretty well defensively in shutting down some of the offensive weapons that are on Montreal's side of things for a good amount of this game. And so, on the whole, I would have liked to see a little more energy. I don't know if they're getting enough credit for things that they did well defensively, especially earlier in the game. But a lot of that also credit to Mackenzie Blackwood, who came up with huge saves tonight. Why did the Avs refuse to shoot on the power play? 1 shot on goal in 3 chances, this was much earlier, is abysmal considering the manpower the Avs have on the ice. Something needs to change. When he sent that in, they had not had the 5 power play opportunities that they did end up getting in this game. And it finished something like 3 shots on goal in 5 opportunities and 5 blocked attempts. it's still not good enough. And it goes back to sort of what troubled them in creating 5v5. I think that what they were doing with the puck, they just weren't making good decisions in the offensive zone, to include on the power play. It's great that they convert on 1 of 5, but it's just not good enough, especially given how close this game ended up being. But I do want to shout out the penalty kill while I'm talking about my complaints around the power play. Perfect penalty kill, came up huge in that overtime period. I just want to shout out the energy that those guys brought. All right, you guys, that's all I have for you tonight. The Avs will be playing the Florida Panthers on Monday, the defending Stanley Cup champs. It's going to be a big game to bounce back from what has been 2 interesting games. Buffalo game, they obviously get the win, but they probably came out a little flatter than they should have. Kind of the same story tonight against Montreal, so they need to bounce back in a much bigger way against the reigning Stanley Cup champions.